I feel like I just have my head down and I'm just doing the sales, I'm doing the thing, and I'm so locked in on like finding the cards, chatting with people and selling them. And then some sort of like outside source, like a partner or a friend or something like that comes in and looks at it and tells me like a way they can see that I should tweak it. I always enjoy having someone else's eyes on the process so that they can tell me what they see I should do differently to make it more streamlined.
This is GoodSellas, a podcast for collectors who want to learn how to sell the cards they don't want so they can get their hands on the cards they need. In every episode, we uncover the secrets collectors use to move their cards so you can sell more and sell faster. Let's get started.
Hey, this is JB. I'm the CEO of Stack and your host for this episode of GoodSellas. GoodSellas is brought to you by Stack, an app where you can run and launch Stack sales directly from your phone. Using Stack, collectors will claim what they want from your sale, and then Stack will automatically reconcile who claimed what, send out your totals, collect payment, and create the labels so that after a sale, all you have to do is hit print and drop your package at the post office. Today, I have Dan Noethe on the show, or as many of you know him, DMN Takeover. For as long as I can remember, or at least as long as I've been hobbying on Twitter, Dan has been running Stack sales. Really, we both have. I've taken ideas from what he's done. I've watched as he posts and posts and posts. He's got dedicated buyers. He builds out stacks for people. And whether he knows it or not, he's helped to really revolutionize the way that people buy small sale cards online. So today, Dan and I are going to talk about his approach, how he came up with the idea for stack selling for himself, what he's doing with it now, and really what the future holds from his perspective for stack sellers as a whole. So without more introduction, Dan, welcome to GoodSellas.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So first question, simple. When did you start stack selling?
Yeah, so, I'm probably going to butcher the exact year, but I think the first formulation of what it became later was probably around 2013, because I'd gotten back into cards around 2011, and I was kind of just doing things on my own, not realizing there was even a group of people still doing it out there. But I've got a picture, I kind of say 2013 because the earliest picture I have of me doing any sort of sale is a picture of my newborn daughter, like laying on me while I'm sitting at the kitchen table listing some cards on Twitter. So I'm assuming that's when it officially began.
What was it like back then in 2013? I got back in, I think, 2018, and same thing. I was like, this exists on the internet? Like, I thought this, not died, but, I didn't know that it was thriving, at least in my time, by 2018. What was it like in 2013?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot less of us for sure, but there was like a really strong community. It was kind of cool, and it was nice. Like, the people, when I found them, the people were like so inviting and so warm and welcoming. Ivan, Watch the Breaks, was actually one of the very first people to kind of welcome me in and like show me what was going on. So as selling, it was a lot different now. There were definitely a lot less people like trying to just buy cards in general, but I mean, the crowd was still there.
So were you selling on Twitter in 2013?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really horrible process at that time because there was this one website that is now defunct, and what I was doing was I was listing. For whatever reason in my mind, it was like, I'm not going to use eBay. I was just like, I'm going to find some other way to like do this. And I listed on this website, I would put listings there. So the same as eBay anyways. And then I would post a link in a Twitter post of the listing, but then tell people that if they followed the link through Twitter and told me that they found it on Twitter, I'd like give them some sort of discount on it. So I was starting to try to find some way of like having my cards there, but building some sort of community on Twitter. It just was the slowest possible way to do it at first.
Which is interesting because the reason that I really liked stack selling on Twitter, and for the audience, we're going to explain this in a second, I promise what we mean by that. But the thing that I really liked about it was the ease of use, right? Like, the thing I hated about eBay was like, here's 25 fields that I need to fill out to explain what this card is. And I don't mind doing that for cards that are $100, $150 plus, but for a $5 card, filling out that it's a Topps Chrome Prism refractor of a veteran player, and this card's going to net me $2, and I just spent 12 minutes doing it, I'm like calculating that back as in my head, not really, but like, that's not a good use of my time. Whereas I could post a picture of 20 of those cards, literally write $2 each, and people could claim them. So, how did you start to figure out that Twitter was a good place for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason why I wanted to use Twitter as a basis originally was because I had previously been a touring musician, and I liked the idea of like building a fan base around something or a community group of people. So I figured that social media was like my go-to for that because I wanted the warmth of the conversations that were able to be had on there, and I wanted people to know me as a person. eBay just felt so cold to me. I just felt like a storefront, and like, I don't know, like how eBay messages go, like they're either not that great or but there's nothing like community or relationship building about them. It's just simple questions, which I figured could be fielded on Twitter, but I could also be establishing a relationship with these folks at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so real quick, before we dive a little bit more into that, for our audience, explain what stack selling is.
Yeah, so it's essentially, it's basically just posting a card on a social media site. Some people use Instagram, some people use Twitter. Twitter's my preferred platform. But you post a card, a picture. You usually don't really share that many details about it. You can pretty much just say dollar amount on there. If people have questions, they'll ask you, and you can go from there. And you treat it kind of as a first come, first served. So people are then able to look at your post. If they want it, they'll generally say something like take or claim or sold. And you can kind of just mark that as sold for them and go along your way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to break down is a little bit that you post a lot. And I definitely want to, if you've been doing this since 2013, I'll be excited to hear what your process is. But talk to me a little bit about how that process, before we get into what it is now, how has your process evolved since 2013?
Oh, man. First of all, I'll say too, I feel like a lot of people are going to hear this and then be like, oh, I do this way better than Dan, and they're going to have something to teach me. But it has been a process over time. Like, there's just certain things I look back at and I'm like, why was I doing it that way? Like, I remember very early on when I'd do it, first of all, it started as just kind of a side thing for me. I would work my other job, I'd come home, I'd do a sale for a couple hours, whereas now it's full time. But I would do things like, I'd send out the tweets. First of all, I'd take really crappy photos. Like, I'd be holding the card up to like my camera on my laptop, so people would also be seeing me at the same time. It was so stupid. And I'd be like letting people claim their things, and I would set them aside in a stack, but I wouldn't like total it up as I was going. So I literally have to go back through and then total up someone's thing. And then one day I had a friend over and they were like, why in the world would you do it like this? So I feel like they were like, you need to like get them in the penny sleeves and then put a running total Post-it note on top of that. I was like, oh, obviously. And then I was doing things like I'd fill our kitchen table with them. And then my wife was like, we got to get you shelves. So like I started getting shelves in the office and then just building stacks in alphabetical order for people and things like that. So I feel like my process has always adapted by me. Like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I just have my head down and I'm just doing the sales, I'm doing the thing, and I'm so locked in on like finding the cards, chatting with people and selling them. And then some sort of like outside source, like a partner or friend or something like that, comes in and looks at it and tells me like a way they can see that I should tweak it. So I always enjoy having someone else's eyes on the process so that they can tell me what they see I should do differently to make it more streamlined.
Yeah, so I think I need to probably get more friends, and my process would be a little bit easier because I've been figuring it out by myself. So I huge difference here in the way you stack sell and the way that I stack sell. And the reason I think is because I, years ago when I first got back into the hobby and started figuring these things out, I started grading cards. So I did it the way you do it, and I'll explain to the audience what I mean by this in a second, which is that Dan will allow for stacks to stay open for periods of time. Me with graded cards, I still call it a stack sale, but it's a little bit less in the traditional way that stack selling is, where I run a sale and I'm way too disorganized or don't have enough space to be able to leave it open for extended periods of time so that people can build. Can you talk a little bit about that, Dan? Like how people can build their inventory with you over time and then close out when they're ready?
Yeah. So I always wanted to kind of establish a way to differentiate myself from like things like eBay and things like that so that they had incentive to buy with me instead of on there. So I wanted to give people the chance to like really build up a pile of cards with me worth their while. And there's still the occasional person who just wants to buy one card and pay out and ship it off and they're done. But for the most part, a lot of the people have, started building stacks over time. So I've got all these shelves of people who, I do sales 4 times a week right now. So I'll allow them to keep adding to that under a flat shipping fee and for up to 2 weeks. That's what I try to do and then close out just so I don't have too much money tied up. But I try to give them that 2-week window so that they do have the opportunity to grab as many cards as they want to. So sometimes you'll see people, once again, it could just be 1 card. Sometimes it's 10 cards. I've had people do hundreds. Like it all depends. But eventually I have to kind of have the conversation of, all right, we gotta move on from this stack kind of thing. I need the space. I need to have the money flow going, as I'm sure you understand too, or anyone else that stack sells. But yeah, I wanted to give people an incentive to just kind of keep showing up because they never really know what's going to pop up next.
And I think that's what the name stack really came from. Like a stack sale was that people could build up their stack over time and then close out when they're ready. And I think that has, just in its nature, it's basically become, if you sell on Twitter, it's called a stack sale. All right, so let's walk through your process a little bit. And I can, at some point maybe talk to mine as well or give some commentary. But let's talk about you. So you decide you want to run, okay, well, for you, you don't really decide. It's like every day. So what does it look like when you get ready to start one of your, I think it was what, Monday, you go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So so let's say it's Monday, you're ready to go run your first sale of the week. What happens first?
So usually like Sunday night, I'll start gathering together the cards that I want to run for Monday. And I'll try to preload like a lot of cards just so that I can start bleeding that into Tuesday and Wednesday kind of. And then sometimes Friday I have to refresh. But I'll take a bunch of pictures on my phone, have those all lined up so that when it comes to it, I can just get in the zone of like all the pictures are there, post the picture, the dollar amount. I usually look at comps on the fly if I have to, but at this point, a lot of times exactly what I want to sell a card for or need to. So that doesn't take too much time nowadays. And I mean, it's really as simple as that. Then once I'm in the sale, like I'm just putting people's cards aside as they grab them. I'm labeling them with a Post-it note, keeping a running total, and then kind of sprinkling in days. Usually like Tuesday, Thursday will be the day that I try to invoice people depending on how big their stacks are getting, and also utilize those as shipping days.
Okay, so you post a bunch of your cards,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you go about? Because it can get crazy. I mean, I've done it, and when you have you end up having like 5 or 10 or 20 people who are like actively engaged, and you get 3 people who say take at the same time. Like, how do you go about reconciling who bought what? Talk to me a little bit also about that process of the running totals.
Sure. So what I'll do is I'll do the sales posting from my phone, and then I'll keep a laptop next to me so I can watch my Twitter notifications come in. So there are times where, multiple people go on in a card at the same time, and they might not know if they were first or not because sometimes it could be seconds apart. So I really go at the mercy of what the Twitter feed tells me came in first. But there is a little bit of, I wish there was a swifter way to do it, in that there are, I don't know for you, but for me, there's a lot of times where I'm like, okay, I've posted 30 cards, but now I need to take like a minute to check the notifications for who claimed what. And then I can list another batch, and then I got to kind of pause and check again. So
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare because for the audience, if you've never done this before, so under the comments on a photo, it does not list comments chronologically. So people go by, they're like, my name's at the top, so I was the one who was first, and I'm like, No, like the notifications actually show you who's first. So what I try to do as I go, same thing. I've got my computer up and my phone up, and I go through the notifications and I try to like, because it makes the heart red. I try to like the tweet that I saw come through first as I go, because the issue is that, let's say you have someone who, and they both claim within the first minute and they're 15 seconds apart, they will actually, they're not differentiated. They're only differentiated down to the minute later. So they both look like they claimed at the same minute. So there's actually no way other than your notifications to determine who was first. So that's what I do. I try to like the one that I saw come through first, and I do exactly what you did, which is after a few, I'm like, all right, I got to figure out who was first now, because it's going to be a nightmare later.
And it's nice that you can just like it like that, because I feel like it's kind of just become widely accepted that that's the way of signifying someone won something without anyone really ever having to tell anyone that. Like, it just became a thing. So it works out pretty nicely.
Yeah. And so talk to me about your time frame. So you said Thursdays are your, hey, do you want to close out? Like, how do you go about the conversation of invoicing and getting people to pay you? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one of the things I do, first of all, is when I do invoice someone, sometimes maybe they bought something on a Monday, but I'm not getting an invoice till Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever day. Sometimes I sneak in some invoicing before a sale. But I'll let them know that the kind of 2-week countdown to build starts from the moment that I contact them, not from the moment of the claim, just in case I'm a little behind. And I'll just let them know, just keeping you in the loop, because I also don't want, occasionally there's the person who claims a bunch of stuff, doesn't really realize how much they spent, and then it's like a huge shocker to them. So I really like letting people know along the way, like, hey, you're at $8, 20, 40, whatever it is, so that they're in the loop, they're aware of where they're at if they have a budget in mind. And I'll send them like updates throughout the week kind of thing, just a reminder of like, hey, this is where you at. Not asking for the money right this second unless you want to. You still have this amount of time left to build a stack. And
once you do get paid, well, actually, let's talk about that first. So what do you do about payment? Do you just take PayPal? Are there a variety of apps that you allow people to pay you on? What does that look like?
Yeah, I prefer PayPal, but ultimately people can use Venmo and Cash App as well. PayPal is just my preferred, because even before like business accounts were forced to use goods and services, I always preferred using goods and services just because it streamlines everything for me. I'd rather just pay that fee and have their address right there and be able to click and print. Yeah, so I'll accept other ways too. It just takes an extra step sometimes to get the label printed.
Same here. For me, I'm like, I already have a business account, so it's just easier. I'll like, let's just pay the taxes. I'm getting a few less at times cents, and let's just do it this way. But yeah, Venmo, what have you. You mentioned label making, so talk to me about your label making and shipping process.
Yeah, so I use a digital printer. I actually can't speak a ton to the shipping process because my wife had taken over it for the last year, which was a godsend. I remember the days before the digital printer of logging into PayPal and printing it off of like my regular desktop computer printer and buying printer ink all the time, and how slow that could go sometimes. But I mean, as far as what she does, really, like, I set the paid cards aside in like card sorting trays, and then she'll just get to it. I mean, we use bubble mailers on everything. I personally don't do PWE or plain white envelope. It's just my preference. And I will, as far as packaging a card, if anyone's curious about that, I'll get the card into a penny sleeve, get into a hard case, put a little strip of blue painter's tape over the top so it's easy to get out. And then I will, unless it's a brick of cards that I already have going out, I'll add some sort of, cardboard or something as a little extra security.
Yeah, for sure. And it hasn't aired yet, but by the time this episode does air, our product video will have gone out, which literally in it, I say that I've recruited both my mother and my wife to help me with shipping.
Beautiful.
Because it sucks so bad.
It does.
So I've been there. It's like the easiest thing you can get someone to help you with. It's like, you don't need to know anything about the cards. Just here's like the process. You know, we're going to make sure they're secure. We're going to get them in an envelope, and please, like, because what I've found too is if you get someone to help you with shipping, it doesn't just like increase it like 2x. It gets you like 3. Like, you get so much more time to work on other things if shipping isn't there, because then you have to break everything out. It's a process.
It is. Shipping was always one of my least favorite parts, just because, like you said, it is literally the easiest thing, but it was just enough of like a time suck from the other things, or like that necessary next step, clearly necessary, that just like felt like that thing. You just wanted to get back to the next, like finding cards, selling cards, hanging out with people. Shipping was always on my least likable thing.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about next. So you mentioned earlier, like, this sense of community, super important to you. Early on, like, how did you go about building that community and driving traffic to your sales?
Yeah. I really just started like just by talking to people. Like, I didn't just jump into Twitter and start doing sales. Like, I was watching early box breaks. I was chatting with people about cards. I was showing off my like Baltimore Ravens PC. I was asking other people about theirs. It was just a lot of conversation and like friendship building. It was funny because when I did start doing the sales, like, stack sales weren't like a thing we just talked about. And they're also, at least as far as Twitter, there wasn't anyone doing it. So even though like what I do, or like what stack sellers do, is not really the most unique thing, because it's just a different form of selling on a platform, it just wasn't happening. So like the community was there as far as I had made a bunch of card friends, but there wasn't people like watching the sales at first. Like, I'm pretty sure I sold like $5 worth of cards in my first 3 weeks of doing it, and anyone should have just like been like, no, this isn't it, and given up from there. But I'm just super stubborn.
And you were like, $5, guys. Like, I made $5 in a way no one knew you could, which is the same thing I saw as I came in. I started interacting with the community, and I saw people like you running these stack sales, and it actually bleeds into my next question. But, you know, I think that there's just such a big piece of it that isn't just like jumping on and posting a bunch of cards for sale and being like, why won't my cards sell? I think there's a very important community piece to people wanting to like treat these sales almost like activity. Like, it's something to do. They're excited to see what's next, but they're having fun doing it. So my question was, something I see a lot online is that people get discouraged by selling on Twitter. They say, you know, this won't sell, or I post to an audience of 0. So what advice would you give to someone who's looking to sell on Twitter?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, honestly, like, my biggest thing that I talk about all the time and remind myself of is just the consistency of showing up. Like, I mean, if I can pull back to like my band touring days, there were nights where we went to a city and played in front of 3 people, and there were nights where we went to a city and played in front of 300. So like, but if you didn't show up for those 3 people, they couldn't trust that you'd be there for them again. So maybe they wouldn't show up and it'd be 0. But if you do show up, those 3 people might each bring 2 friends next time, and then it's double, you know, like, so I'm of the mind of like, when it is discouraging, it does really suck. It sucks when someone doesn't show up for something where you had an anticipation and excitement built around it. It sucks when you feel like things you wanted to sell aren't moving, and it can be super discouraging. But I always like thinking of that as just more of a challenge, and like seeing the ways in which you can not only challenge yourself to keep going when no one else does. Because the thing is, eventually people will show up. Like, if you show up enough, it's the same as like, I also think of it as like driving past a billboard. Like, how many times have you driven past a billboard for years and years and it means absolutely nothing to you? But, you know, maybe something goes wrong with your plumbing, and like that billboard is the thing that was like locked into your subconscious that you then call when you need someone to like work on the pipes in your home. You know, it's like that kind of thing. Like, just letting people know that you'll be there, whether they are or aren't at first. Eventually they'll want to start coming, because they might not come the first time, the 5th time, the 20th time, But if they want to show up the 21st time and you stopped or you didn't want to show up, like you might have just been that far away from them being there for you too. So consistency is like always, I think, like the biggest key to it all. Because I've seen times where people have great prices on cards and I see no comments on there, and it's clearly nothing about their pricing. They might have followers and things like that, but they just might not have the eyes on it. And it can come down to so many factors. Like it could be the time of day, how clogged someone's feed is, weird algorithms, yada, yada. But I just think if you keep showing up, eventually people show up for you too.
Yeah, I totally feel that when you're saying it, because during, the pre-PSA shutdown, I sent like basically everything I owned to PSA that was, of value. I wasn't sending like 5th year vet cards for the most part, and maybe a few LeBrons, like those like 17th year, but for the most part, trying to send things that were rookies that people may be interested in. And for a long time, I was getting back a bulk PSA order like a year and a half later, but like every 2 to 3 weeks. And people knew that they could count on me to be there with relatively cheap slabs. And I had like this buying base because I was getting back Pokemon cards, baseball cards for the most part. Those were like the 2 main ones. And then I started to get Marvel because I went through a little phase there. And I had like buyers in those specific spaces that knew, okay, like JB is going to be back with, either my Pokemon buyers were going to, they were ready when I was going to run a Pokemon stack sale, and my baseball buyers knew to be ready when I was going to do my baseball stack sale. And then that dried out, right? And so recently, as I've been getting back less stuff, it's just been a different world. I go to post and I'm like, there's nobody here. And so I would even argue more in the direction of what you're saying, that it really doesn't matter as much the following base. I think it's much more, the consistency that people know that they can buy from you. And I was selling more with far less followers than I have now because people knew I was going to show up versus, I have more now, just the nature of being online longer. And, and now I'm like sending stuff to consignment houses because I'm like, I don't have the energy every, 60 days to spend 4 days trying to drive traffic. And then I do it and nobody shows up. The second piece I'll say, Dan, and I bet you can relate to this, is I think just about every stack sale I've run, within the first 15 minutes, I've either said in my head or to my wife, no one's going to buy from me today. No one's buying. No one's here. It's dead. And then you get 1, and then you get 2, and then a couple of people, both say take on a card, and one gets it and the other one is like, oh, nice, dude. And then it kind of like picks up after that. So I think there's a big piece of also just not giving up on it. Like you mentioned consistency. I think there's a mixture of like consistency and just keeping at it. If you go and you post 3 cards for sale and no one buys either of them, and then you call it quits, like it's kind of on you.
Yeah, agreed.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned, or you didn't mention, but I was looking that it looks like you're doing a lot of different things. I was wondering if you could take me through that. I just looked at your Twitter bio. You got Loop the app going on, Takeover TV running on YouTube. Can you just talk about a few of the different things that you're doing, how you got into them, and then where you are now?
So previously I had only ever done my sales on Twitter. Loop was the first time that I really stepped away from that. And that came from not this most recent national, but the national before in Chicago. On the last morning, Eric, the CEO of Loop, asked if we could just meet for a little bit. And I was about to head out. And he just told me that.
I was with you right before that meeting.
Yeah.
I remember when you got the meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Through Sports Stuff Hub, I think was the one that kind of like gave him my name. But yeah, he just kind of, they were all breakers at the time, really, and they wanted to dabble in and see, kind of test how a single seller would go on there. So I do that, not consistently the same way as Twitter. I probably do it about once every other week. And then Takeover TV has been a new project that's kind of, slowly unraveling. I have some pretty like grandiose ideas for it that we'll see if I can pull off or not, featuring some other friends in a little bit of different arenas in the entertainment world. But It's something I'm excited about. For now, it's something where I just kind of do, I do things like I call it a weekly wrap up. I just kind of talk about what's been going on in sports or if there's any interesting news. I'm also kind of trying to like make it, I mean, it sounds corny to say like a TMZ, but like making news out of things that aren't normally news just based on what I see people talking about in the hobby world on Twitter. Like, if it's someone's birthday, I'll give them like a birthday shout out, or like so-and-so pulled this amazing card or just added this sweet card to their personal collection or, something like that. Just like things that wouldn't normally be like newsworthy, just trying to make it a little bit fun. Otherwise I just talk about like any sports card related things that pop into my head, but got a lot of future ideas stirring that are a little weird, but I'm excited to try to pull off.
But I think that stuff's important though, when I ran my first YouTube show called Just Another Card Show, one of the things that I did was hobby guy or gal of the week, or maybe we leave it in. I don't know. We can watch me get tongue tied. But trying to really reach out to people one at a time. Like I think people look at this sea of hobby Twitter as this vast sea of people, and I much more look at it, and I'm sure you do too, especially when you stack sell, as individuals that are there. And I realized that by just reaching out to one person at a time, hey, I did a weekly show. This person was the hobby guy of the week. Here's why, I think I nominated T-Murph one time because he does a bunch of charity work and like, he's just like all around good person. And then all of a sudden he's kind of singing the praises of not only my show, but then driving people to my sales. And, the thing you learn with stack sales is a lot of times you get like 4 or 5 people who really butter your bread. And then there are people sprinkled in throughout. You have your regulars who come and buy. And so I think, it is important, and it sounds like what you're doing is just continuing to build your sense of community around, your Takeover brand, for lack of a better word.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's kind of like, the stuff that I'm doing for Takeover TV at this point it's not high production. It's me talking like this in front of the camera kind of deal. I also just wanted to offer that up as like, I think it's really easy to feel imposter syndrome when you see some of the other like content creators do these like really, well-produced videos and stuff like that. And I love that too. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I just want people who feel like they have something to talk about, feel like they have something to offer, kind of know that they can just share that. Like you don't have to like wait to start going. You can, and I mean, I guess that's what the Takeover is built around. Like I hopped in and then I've just developed it over time. Like I didn't have to wait until the perfect moment because I probably would have never gotten started if I kept waiting. Probably would be like 5 years out kind of deal. I'd like never trust it. So that's kind of part of what I wanted to do as well.
Yeah, and that's what I did my first time around. I'm running a professional content agency on one side of my life. And meanwhile, I'm running like super low production value, using my phone, recording me opening boxes, drinking beer. Like that was how I started. And I ended up shutting that down for a long time, but I built 1,000 subscribers to my YouTube channel. Now I can do like, I'm kind of changing the way that I'm doing things. But at the time I was just having fun on camera, talking about people who are doing good stuff in the hobby. I was stack selling cards. I was just having a lot of fun with it. And I think, at the time, I don't know if I felt a necessary imposter syndrome because it was so low value that I was like, I'm not trying to be anybody but myself here. And I think it's great. Anybody can go out there and make something and provide value to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I bet when you were doing that too, like it might have felt low value to you, but I bet to all the viewers, it was like, it felt like your neighbor or something, or like your buddy. Like you felt so human.
drinking a beer, ripping retail blasters of flagship tops. Like there's nothing high value about it, but I was having fun. I started bringing friends onto the show and we would box battle and just mess around. And that was kind of how I got into it. The same thing. I kind of identified that building a community around my Twitter profile would allow me to sell cards to then go buy the cards that I wanted and build my personal, collection, which, I did very out in the open with all the things Soto for years. So Dan, I think that's it for today. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and it was great having you on GoodSellas.
It was awesome being here. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to GoodSellas. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow along wherever you get your favorite podcasts. To learn more about the hobby and how to sell your cards faster and easier, visit us at stacksales.io. We'll see you next time.